I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. My first introduction to blockchains was through Bitcoin. I'm a strong believer in Bitcoin, the asset, technology, the community. But I felt that a lot of the things I was doing became easy on Ethereum. If we constrain ourselves to Bitcoin scripting language, how do we do this? But if you just had Ethereum scripting language, it became easy. It's like, okay, why are we constraining ourselves? We have this other platform, let's use that. And that's where
Steven Goldfeder, the co-founder and CEO of Off-Chain Labs.
The team behind Arbitrum, one of the most widely used platforms, helping Ethereum scale by making transactions faster and cheaper.
What's the problem with Solana?
there are two arguments against that. Number one is the experimentation and innovation aspect. I don't think we know which 6 smart contracts are important today. Even if you believe that only 6 smart contracts will matter, we are so early on that the thought that in 5 or 10 years that won't change drastically is just wrong. And if you look back 5 years, it has, so why wouldn't it in the next 5 years?
What does Ethereum success look like to you?
Diversity and experimentation. The Ethereum Foundation doesn't pay me to build on Ethereum. It is an open ecosystem where others have figured out business models. That is resilience. That is success.
What the hell is multi-party computation?
There are 2 millionaires out for dinner. They want to know who has a higher net worth, and that person will pay, but neither of them wants to share their net worth with the other. But it turns out you don't really need to. You need to put yours into the machine. I need to put mine into the machine. And all we need is this one bit output that says yours higher or is mine higher.
We need to talk about Arbitrum a bit. Your company Off-Chain Labs launched a layer 2 called Arbitrum. What's the difference between Arbitrum and all the other layer 2s built on Ethereum?
Great question.
69% of the people who watch this podcast have not subscribed. If you enjoy this show, if it provides value to you in one way, shape, or form, can I please ask you a little favor? Can you click that subscribe button, give this video a like, and leave a comment down below? It helps this show more than you can imagine. My goal is to bring the absolute biggest and brightest people on this channel, and the best way to get there is to have all of us rally together and build the When Shift Happens family. Thank you. This conversation is supported by Jupiter, the most used decentralized trading platform on Solana and the largest DAO in the world. Bitwise Asset Management, the crypto specialist asset manager with more than $10 billion in client assets and more than 30 crypto solutions across ETFs, index funds, alpha strategies, staking, and more. 3. A scalable layer 1 blockchain that's fast, secure, and affordable, built by previous Facebook developers, and that delivers the benefits of Web3 with the ease of Web2. And Mental, an Ethereum layer 2 that built 2 products I particularly like. FBTC, which enables you to borrow and lend Bitcoin in DeFi, and METH or METH, one of the largest ETH liquid staking protocols in crypto. To support this show, please check the sponsors links in the description down below. I'm gonna spend my day tomorrow preparing and chilling a bit, resting my brain and my mind.
Wow, you have this down to a science.
Well, with time you learn, right? Who was saying that? I mean, I'm doing too many podcasts lately, so I don't remember. But one of them, a very smart guy, talked about. I was Brandon from Phantom, I think.
Okay.
Energy management versus time management, right? And so that's it, right? I mean, you need to manage your time, but most people say, I need to manage my time. But actually, how do I manage my energy through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of building a business so I don't crash and burn out or just end up hating what I'm doing, right?
100%. I'm not there, but I've seen many people burn out. So yes, it's important to actually keep on top of that.
Have you ever felt near not giving up, but like, this is too much, man, I need to change something?
No, I don't know, just not me. Like, I just don't get like that, but like, I've seen many people like, burn out like that, but it doesn't happen to me. I don't know why.
You're built different, just locked in, as we say.
I guess so.
If you had to describe what it is you do and why you do it, what would you say?
Formally, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Off-Chain Labs. We build Arbitrum. We build Prism. So Prism is the leading consensus client for Ethereum Layer 1. Arbitrum is the leading Layer 2 blockchain, but also blockchain stack used by 100 chains. And, historically, I'm researcher. I was very technical, and together with Ed and Harry, we built the initial academic prototype and built the actual paper initial prototype product. Today, I'm a lot less on the technical detail side, but more on the business development side and actually building the ecosystem and trying to make sure that the world understands this technology and is able to build on it.
How much do you like this kind of new role that you have to develop throughout the years, going from very technical to the business person, because you're the boss at the end of the day, so you have to represent the business and the technology?
So it's really interesting, actually. I remember when this happened. So I was standing outside a building in Princeton with Ed and Harry, and Ed had just spoken to somebody.
Can you explain who this person is for the audience that is, I would say, more normal people? So we'll try to make a lot of themes and words very simplified today.
Yes. So my co-founders at Off-Chain Labs, I have two co-founders. So I was a PhD student at Princeton. I was at Princeton from 2013 to 2018. I have two co-founders. One is Ed Felton. Ed was a professor at Princeton for almost 30 years, professor of computer science and public policy. And then Harry is my second co-founder. Harry was also a PhD student at Princeton 1 year behind me. And I started Princeton in 2013, and that's when I first learned what crypto was. We didn't call it crypto. So actually, my formal background is in cryptography, and that to me, that's what crypto was. And actually, for the longest time, I would say I was very anti using the word crypto. I mean cryptocurrencies. It had to be cryptography because that's what I thought. Obviously, I've come around today to the language, but so that's when I first introduced to Bitcoin, and then together with my advisor and Ed and some others, we actually wrote a textbook on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And then much of my early work was on actually protocols to secure digital assets, so we call MPC or multi-party computation protocols. Back then, no one was building these for blockchains. Together with someone named Rosario Gennaro, who was a professor at CUNY, we wrote papers building the core protocols for this, and these protocols were commercialized and are used today by probably most of the asset managers for institutions. So Fireblocks commercialized our initial protocol. A company called Curve, which was sold to PayPal, was another one, and many others. And today, this has become really the standard. But that was one focus of my academic work. But anyway, I distracted myself. The question was, so Ed and Harry are my co-founders at Princeton, and towards the end of my graduate career at Princeton, we were building Arbitrum. So the history of Arbitrum was, if you look actually on YouTube and look for the very first mention of Arbitrum, you'll find a fall 2014 Princeton class semester video, like a final semester. And this is a bunch of undergraduate students and Ed. It was Ed's idea in 2014, and he led this seminar where people were building Arbitrum. So what is Arbitrum? Arbitrum is a scaling solution for smart contracts. And the reason I like to mention that date is back when that class happened, there wasn't a smart contract platform that was live. There wasn't Ethereum. Ethereum didn't exist. Ethereum went live 6 months after that video in July of 2015. It was theorized. There were academic papers. There was Ethereum discussions and papers, but there actually was no live platform. And Ed looked at the academic literature and said, this isn't going to work, right? In the sense that it's not going to scale. Either it's going to go away or the demand's going to be too high and it won't scale and won't work. We need to build something that will actually scale that. And he came up with this early design of what we call Arbitrum. And he worked with some initially undergrads in a class project. They did their thing for a semester. And then Ed went off to the White House for 2 years. So he was the senior advisor to President Obama in the last 2 years of the administration. He was a deputy CTO of the United States. And he went off to the White House for 2 years, and this project basically lie fallow. He came back in 2017 after the election, and that's when Harry and I went to Ed, knocked on his door and said, hey, Ed, you remember Arbitrum? Let's pick that up, right? It looks like scaling is becoming a real problem now, because now, fast forward 2 years, Ethereum was live. There were smart contract platforms, and scaling looked like it was becoming an issue. This was the era of things like CryptoKitties, right? Today, like we look back and that wasn't really a big scaling issue, but at the time it felt like, okay, it's become real and we have an issue. And that's when we started building out Arbitrum from an academic context. And we did that for about 2 years at Princeton, and we published the Arbitrum paper in the summer of 2018. That's also when I graduated Princeton. And that's right around when this conversation happened. That's where I started. So Ed and Harry and I were standing outside of Princeton, of our building at Princeton, of Sherrod Hall. That was the glass building where we did most of our academic work. And Ed had gotten off a phone call with someone that knew something about startups. And he said, I think we're going to do this startup. We need to figure out roles for ourselves. And he said, Steven, in the 2 meetings we've had with VCs, you've talked the most. I think you should be the CEO. I go, okay. And he's like, Harry, you write some code. We all wrote code, but you should be the CTO. He's like, and I'm the professor. I think I'll be the chief scientist. And we looked at each other and said, all right, that sounds about right. And the thing was, this was the most delayed effect decision that was possible, because to the extent that there were investor meetings or any meetings, we were all there, the 3 of us. To the extent that there was protocol design or research, we were all working on it. To the extent that there was code written, and we were all contributing to this at the time. And these roles didn't differentiate. But over time, that decision actually had an effect, because what happened was 6 months later, something procedural came up, and Harry would say, hey, Steven, you got to deal with this. You're the CEO. You got to deal with this. And on the flip side, something would come up in the code that I didn't want to do. And I'd say, Harry, you're the CTO. You gotta do this. And over time, we grew into these roles.
And there was never an issue, because you are all very technical, right? So it's probably helping there. But first startup happened to a lot of people. You take a role, but you don't really know even the roles that are needed, and then you end up having some co-founder issues or arguments, which I think is the third reason why most business fail.
We've been very, very fortunate to never have any issues like that. That's not to say we don't have disagreements. We have disagreements, every single day, but we've never had a disagreement that we couldn't get passed. Disagreements are good. If we all agreed on the same thing for every decision, we probably wouldn't be doing anything that interesting, right? We're doing things that are on the forefront of technology, of business development in our field, and we're always going to have different opinions on how things go. But we've managed to figure out how to, work past those, work together, convince each other of the merits and make decisions. And that's actually, I think, been extremely successful for us. Now, we had some track record here, right? We had worked together in different capacities for 5 years before we launched the company, right? I knew Harry for 4 years. Ed was my, advisor at Princeton for 5 years. Actually, so I said I learned about Bitcoin when I came to Princeton. The truth is, it was on the Princeton visit day in 2013 when I first actually learned what Bitcoin was, first heard the word for the first, all the professors were giving lightning talks, and Ed gave a lightning talk on Bitcoin. Actually, the topic of his talk was how much it would cost for a government to take down Bitcoin. This was my first introduction to Bitcoin. And I think at the time it was a few $100 million, which seemed impossible at that time. Now, obviously, if you look at the Bitcoin market cap, that's a relatively small percentage of the value there. But, we've had this, work together on this technology for years and years, and that helped us a lot. We knew what we were getting into. It wasn't we were 3 people that had just met, starting a company together.
Dear When Shift Happens family, the following message is probably the single most important thing you should take away from today's podcast. If you're serious about your crypto investing journey, please take some time to learn how to self-custody your assets to make sure that nobody can take your coins away. Ever. If you don't learn how to be your own bank, it is very likely that one day you will lose all your hard-earned crypto. The safest way to hold your crypto is in a cold storage that we also call hardware wallets. Hardware wallets are not complicated and they give you peace of mind. I personally use a hardware wallet called Trezor. It is open source, very easy to use, and the first hardware wallet created ever. As we like to say it in crypto, not your keys, not your coin. You can order your Trezor wallet with a 10% discount by following the link in the description down below and by using the promo code WSH10. And now, back to the episode. You mentioned a lot of things that actually I wrote questions about. Cryptography, your PhD, MPC, and a bunch of other things. Even CryptoKitties, I have a question about that.
Oh, okay.
But first things first, you said I'm the CEO of Off-Chain Labs, the business developer, but you're probably more than that. Who are you?
Okay, I'm Steven. So, yes, I've been, well before I heard of cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin or blockchain. So I did my undergrad in math and computer science, and I was actually very, very interested in cryptography. And that's how initially I actually came to learn about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. It was from this cryptographic angle. So I had spent, as an undergrad, I spent a summer working with a professor. His name was Yehuda Lindell. He's one of the actually most well-known people in the MPC field, a really well-known, respected researcher today. Fast forward to today, he actually is heads cryptography at Coinbase. But years ago, he was just a professor at Bar-Ilan University, which is where I spent the summer with him there, and I got really even more interested in cryptography, and that was really my angle here. And I wanted to do, I was sure that I wanted to be an academic researcher and become a cryptographer, and that's where I spent my PhD doing. I remember when I did, so I did a bunch of internships at a time. I remember during my first Google internship, this was in 2013, there was a friend of mine, also an intern, and this friend was like dead set on being, an industry like, dead set on doing a startup. And I was like dead set on being an academic, and we would like dicker each other all day long. Fast forward today, this guy's a professor at a university. I have my startup, completely switched paths, but this was definitely not where I thought I was going. But I still love, the research aspect of it. I still love, when I have time, I like to read cryptographic papers. But doing the BD role, doing the more, not just BD, building the business and all this role was definitely something which was not part of my training, not where I expected to be, but something which I really, really enjoy, and I'm very happy about doing.
And here we are today.
And here we are today. Exactly.
There's a common pattern across most of the very successful people who are interviewed on this podcast. They have a sort of childhood trauma or something that happened in their life that gave them a chip on the shoulder. What happened in your life that gave you this fire in the belly?
That's a really good question. I don't know that there's actually, I have to think about that. But there's not, one specific point, I would say, which I can track back there. I'll tell you this, like, I look back to different points in my life, and I often see certain failures that I had as being instrumental in helping me build to where I was today. And it's funny because at the time, he seemed like, the biggest failures and the worst possible thing. But like, I look back and I say, hey, like, I wouldn't be here where I was today if that didn't happen. So I'll give you, a few examples. So I mentioned that I did a few internships. So I did a Google internship. I said the first time was in 2013. It was the summer of 2012, the previous summer, that I actually met Yehuda Lindell, who I mentioned already as well, and, really got interested in cryptography. The story that I didn't tell you before that was, in the summer of 2011, I actually did a research internship as well, and I liked that a lot. And 2012, I was ready to go to industry and ready to, do like a real big tech company internship. But I didn't get one. And and I remember getting rejected. I got so the way that the Google internship process works, I don't know if you're familiar, is like, at least back then, you got these interviews, these general interviews, and then you pass those and you get put into this pool of applicants. And someone has to pull you out of that pool and say, I want to work with this particular intern. And I got to that stage, and then no one pulled me out. I got interviewed too, and I just didn't get that job. And so I said, okay, I felt like really, really upset, and felt like it was a failure. And then I said, I guess I have to go back and find the research internship this summer. And I went there like a bit begrudgingly, went back to the same program I went the previous year, decided to go to a different professor. That's where I said, cryptography, that sounds interesting. Let's do that. And actually, I look back at the time and I wonder, had I gotten that internship that summer, probably the trajectory of my career would have gone, extremely differently. And there are so many times in life where I can look at minor failures and short setbacks as having been very at the time seemed like the end of the world, but actually opened up possibilities to work with different people and to meet people that I really would have never met before. I mentioned to Garrett here on the car on the way over that so I did my PhD at Princeton, which is also obviously very helpful, indicative, very helpful in the path of getting here today. But and actually almost I really, so I was before that I was a master's student at Columbia. And I was really just wanted to stay at Columbia, but and I ended up getting accepted to do my PhD at Columbia. But the reason I only applied anywhere else is I didn't get accepted early enough that I knew that. Had my professor at Columbia said, hey, we're taking you in and we'll accept you, I would have never even applied to Princeton. At the time, that was upsetting to me that I had to go ahead and apply to other schools. Fast forward a couple of months later, I had applied to other schools. I went there and I decided, I actually like this group at Princeton a lot, and I'm going to go there. Even though at that point I had gotten accepted there as well. So again, there's this pattern of minor failures which seem big in the moment, but being part of a much larger story. And not to say that life would have been worse or different in a bad way, but like clearly, all these things which seemed like failures at the time were, very instrumental and important for me. And I've always, been, always wanted to do the best that I could, make an impact, and you get knocked down, you keep on going. So I don't know if that quite qualifies as what you're looking for, but
Everything happens for a reason.
everything happens for a reason, and it's very sometimes hard to see that in the short term. But if you look back and you're like, wow, that like intricate set of things felt like bad at the time, but really wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that.
You did a PhD in cryptography.
Yes.
How does one have the idea of doing a PhD in cryptography?
So I was fortunate, based on some of the like twists and turns that I mentioned before, to actually have, the fortune to work with some excellent cryptographers of the way. So start off with Udall and Dell, and again, just by fortune that summer, I remember at the end, he said, "Oh, you're going to Columbia to do a master's degree there. I have a good friend who's a professor there. I'll introduce you to her." And that also led to me, her name is Tal Malkin, also led to, she's a fantastic cryptographer and gave me great opportunities there to learn with her and spend time with her, and just built up my interest in that over time. And, by the time, halfway around that year came through and it was time to apply to PhD programs, it was clear to me that I wanted to continue this. I was fascinated by, the field of modern cryptography, which is like, as kids, you're always like, interesting code breaking. Like it's always like something which had been interest me as a kid, but never really understood the mathematical underpinnings of like modern cryptography until late in my undergraduate and early graduate career. And it was clear to me that I wanted to continue down that path and, go deep into it. At that point, I probably imagined that I go more down a theoretical cryptography path, which is more like mathematical. I ended up going down a much more applied path, which is how do we actually take these tools that we know and build like, build things for like securing Bitcoin and digital assets, digital asset custody. So definitely not exactly what I thought, but I was always, fascinated by these things, and I had the opportunity to work with really, really great people that only deepened my fascination for them.
One of the things you did during your PhD research, you mentioned before, is about multi-party computation.
Yeah.
What the hell is MPC, multi-party computation? Explained to a normie like me.
Super simple. So MPC is actually like a broad field that's much larger than, key custody and cryptography. And the field of MPC is the idea that you have some information and I have some information, and how can we compute some value on that information? I'll give you an example in a second, in a way that actually keeps our privacy. So the typical example is, there are two millionaires out for dinner and they want to know who has a higher net worth, and that person will pay, but neither of them wants to share their net worth with the other. But it turns out like you don't really need to. All we need to do, you need to like put yours into one machine, into the machine. I need to put mine into the machine, and all we need is this one bit output that says, is yours higher or is mine higher? And the idea of building these protocols where different people, there's like information that's like sharded among different people, if you will, and we compute some result on the on the information without actually sharing the information. That's the field here. And there are like applications of like medical data and privacy, right? How can different hospitals that can't or don't want to share, patient data, mine, general statistics on that data and really gain insight from that. And that's like a lot of where the, historical field of MPC was focused. And there's a lot of work on general purpose computation. Where I was interested as a graduate student was, hey, you have this thing called Bitcoin. And it seems like a problem that you have this private key, and it seems like a problem that if you lose your key, right, or someone steals your key, you lose all access to it. So the motivation for me was, how do we build like almost like two-party authentication or multi-party authentication for this, and we take your individual key and we split it up into many different shares. And these shares are cryptographically private, which means, say that it's like you need 2 out of 3 of them. If you just have one, you don't learn any information about the key, right? So you need actually, whatever that threshold is to actually reconstruct the key. And then you can do things like, give different people shares of a key and they can jointly sign things without ever having to reconstruct the key or put the key in one place. Or you can have a single person with multiple devices in different places that they can now, have resilience. So let's say they have, a 3 out of 5. And if one of them, gets lost to a fire, they still have the ability to use the others to reconstruct their keys. And, that was the motivation that I came to the field of MPC. So with Bitcoin, at the time, Ethereum as well, the ECDSA was the signature algorithm that's used. So there's a particular type of cryptographic signature called ECDSA, and that's what was used to sign things. And the question was, how do we build a protocol that allows you to split these ECDSA keys and sign with them in a way that's cryptographically secure? And to me, it was like an obvious problem. And fast forward to today, like, again, solutions exist and everyone institutionally is using them. But back then, no one was really looking at this. And I looked at the literature, because that's what you do as a researcher. The first thing you do is try to see who has touched this in literature. And no one had touched this problem in a decade. But there was one paper from a decade earlier that had done some early work on this. It was a little more than a decade, actually. So this is a 2001 paper, I think. And this was 2013 when I was looking at this. And really, no one had touched it in the interim, or barely anyone. And maybe 1 or 2 papers. And I saw, hey, there was this... and another story, how things come together very nicely. I looked, whose paper is this? It's this guy named Rosario Gennaro. So who's Rosario? I'm like, oh, I know Rosario, because when I was at Columbia last year, Rosario actually was sitting in my class on homomorphic encryption. He was, a professor at CUNY, but he came to this class as well. He sat in on this class. So I went over and I went over to Rosario's office, emailed him. I went over to his office and said, hey, I want to solve this problem. And Rosario was like, all right, I worked on this like a decade plus ago, but let's do this. And together we built some of the, core protocols that again are used today to secure probably hundreds of billions plus of digital assets. And again, it's super fortunate to me that I had the random opportunity to meet Rosario, not random, but really it was seemed random at the time to meet Rosario a year earlier. And just to make that story even more fun, fast forward to today, Rosario actually is a member of our research team at Offchain Labs as well.
I have another fun fact to add to that related to the MPC technology. Before this podcast started to become more serious about 2 years ago, where I decided that every week I would have a big person of the industry in studio and we'd have a conversation like that. I was doing during COVID, like here and there, some AMAs, like online podcasts, right? Zoom meetings. And one of the guys I had on was Alex Mashinsky from Celsius. And he was big into saying, we're using this MPC technology to secure your crypto assets, blah, 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 blah. And he was using that probably as a buzzword to tell people, hey, the assets are safe, etc. It was the first time I basically came across this term, right? What does that mean concretely when a business like Celsius or let's say Fireblocks, which still exists today?
Sure.
What does that mean concretely when they're using this to secure your crypto assets for a normal person?
Yeah. So the nice thing is, like a company like Fireblocks, is they can actually say, you're a user, and
just Fireblocks is what is Fireblocks?
So Fireblocks is one of the largest custodian, it provides institutional custody solutions via multi-party computation. And what they do is they have a platform where you can store your assets, securely, and you can transact on chain or sending assets to people, all different digital assets across different blockchains. And they do it in a way that they don't, right? So the problem is you say, well, let's say your custodian is hacked. What you don't want is all the funds to be able to be stolen or, somehow lost. And you say, okay, so maybe right? So that's the problem. So you can use a custodian, like an exchange, but then, there have been so many different exit scams or rug pulls along over the years. I personally, when I first bought ETH on this, foreign exchange, and eventually exit scam that I lost all my assets that were on that. So I personally dealt with this back in 2015 or so.
I actually had 3 days after the Bybit hack, I had Dan from Bybit in the studio in Singapore.
Oh wow!
Just a few weeks ago,
And so, I mean, it's not exactly the same because they're legit business, but like this still happens even today, right?
Right. Yeah. It's not always at the. Sometimes it's an exchange that's not scrupulous and exits. Sometimes it's a really good people that they're susceptible to hack. The idea is, if there's a single key that sits somewhere, here are your two options. Someone else is holding the key for you, or you're holding the key yourself. Both of those aren't fantastic options for many people, right? So someone else holds the key for you, they're susceptible to loss or hack. If you're holding the key yourself, you're susceptible to loss or hack. And for many users, by the way, forget about institutions for a second, for retail users, they don't understand this, right? A retail user has their key and then they lose it, and they expect there to be this like reset password button. It's like, all right, I lost my password. I go and I press the button, but like, no. This is your cryptographic key. This is your Bitcoin. And if you lose this, nobody can reset your password, right? No one has it. And there's like, so the question is, how do you actually build those experiences for people? And the answer is you share the responsibility. The simplest one is among the custodian and the user, right? So the custodian holds one share and the user holds one share, and together they can spend the money. Now, if the custodian is hacked, they can't do it by themselves. If the user is hacked, they can't do it by themselves. So now you need to simultaneously, hack two people. You can do this with more people. You do this with 10 people. You can do this with, 5 different devices. And you have some threshold that in order to actually steal funds, you need to now bypass the security of simultaneously of different devices or different people in the space. And that's like, the beauty of what MPC technology can bring to custody.
What happens if the user loses his part of the keys?
So typically there will be, and this really depends more in the product, exact product of the different custodians. I don't want to speak for any specific product, but like typically you'll have redundancy. So it's not going to be like 2 out of 2. It'll be 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5 and some configuration. And there are these backup shares that sit somewhere. Sometimes those shares themselves sit encrypted. So maybe I'll give it to the custody provider, but I'll hold the encryption key. So in a way that we can only together jointly access it, but typically you'll want some sort of redundancy or resilience to those sort of hacks, right? So yeah, if you have like a 2 out of 2, you have a problem because if one's lost, no one can access these funds. So typically you'll have redundancy, built into any such scheme.
You mentioned before you called for the book in 2016, demonstrating your deep understanding of blockchain technology. The book is called Bitcoin and Cryptocurrency Technologies. In a nutshell, probably was a very technical book, my guess would be, because I came into crypto in late 2018, early 19, and the books I was reading for normal people was Bitcoin Standard and the Internet of Money, Antonopoulos, which was absolutely, and then you had Mastering Bitcoin, Mastering Ethereum, which was more technical, right? So my guess is your book was more technical. In a nutshell, for someone as simple as me, normal, who is not technical. First, why did you write a book?
So this came together, actually started off as a lecture series at Princeton with Ed, and my advisor was Arvind, and some others at Princeton that were doing this lecture series, Coursera lecture series. I actually wasn't a lecturer there. I was helping out. And then they said, hey, it was successful. Why don't we turn this into a textbook, right? So the idea is there were different books written here, but there was no computer science textbook that started from the fundamentals and did a rigorous treatment of, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency technologies as you'd expect, in a, say, graduate or advanced undergraduate course on these topics. There just simply was no textbook. So that's what motivated us to take this course material, take the research that was done for that and turn it into a textbook format. And that's what we did. And it turned out that it was very well received because there were, at that point, I think it was published in 2016, there were so many different universities that were starting to do courses at the time and needed good materials. And this book sort of just took off. Even to date, it's used in hundreds of university courses, translated into, I think, 5 or 6 languages. And I don't think there's actually any competitor to date. We're keeping pressure to write a V2 of the book. So hopefully that will happen at some point because, it was written in 2016. A thing or two has happened since then. But actually it went back to the core fundamentals. So you'd be surprised, but a lot of it is still just very relevant today, right? A lot of what hasn't changed, the core, ideas of consensus and smart contracts, a lot of these things are actually still very, very relevant today. And the book is, really widely used today. And I still don't think that there is any competitor when it comes to just a general computer science textbook for cryptocurrencies. So that was the motivation really to, build the educational materials necessary to turn this into a rigorous subject that, could be studied at the university level, which is a prerequisite for many to actually, get into the space and start contributing at the sort of more graduate advanced research level.
You discovered crypto through cryptography and then Bitcoin. What do you think about Bitcoin?
I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. I don't spend much day-to-day time today on Bitcoin. A lot of my early work was on, Bitcoin specifically. All the ECDSA MPC work was initially focused on Bitcoin. That was all that was there. I had some early papers on escrow protocols and other things that were exclusively targeted to Bitcoin. But I became a big believer in Ethereum and smart contracts as, I'll tell you this. I found that a lot of the research I was doing at some point, like on Bitcoin, like these escrow protocols, for example, which is how do you hold money in escrow in a secure way so we can, you pay me and I only release it if someone else agrees. This was like one of the early protocols that I did. And I felt that a lot of these protocols just became easy on Ethereum, right? A lot of the things I was doing were, that I was interested in was these protocols on top of Bitcoin. And I felt myself writing, papers that were, well, if we constrain ourselves to Bitcoin scripting language, how do we do this? But if you just had Ethereum scripting language, it became easy. And that became less interesting to me because the problems that I was interested in sounded more artificial. It's like, okay, why are we constraining ourselves? We have this other platform, let's use that. And that's where I began to focus more on Ethereum and said, okay, what can we build on Ethereum and how can we push the limits there and do research there and how can we extend Ethereum in really interesting ways? And that's where I became personally interested in smart contracts from a research and development perspective. But my first introduction to, blockchains was through Bitcoin, and I still am a strong believer in Bitcoin, the asset, Bitcoin, the technology, Bitcoin, the community. I'm not a maxi in the way that I'm like only Ethereum, only Arbitrum. I don't have any respect for Bitcoin. Like absolutely not. I have a ton of respect for Bitcoin. I think it has a very, very important place in the present and future of the industry.
What is Ethereum if you had to explain it to a child?
It's a computer that we all share, right? It's a computer. So maybe a child will want to play a game on the computer and say a simple game like chess or checkers. And, today you can go and play chess or checkers with the computer, but now you want to play with two players. And now you also want to add money to that, add a bet, right? So whoever wins, maybe the child shouldn't be betting, but that's up to their parents. But for this example, you have some bet on this game. And what you have is you have a computer that follows some set of rules, and it can also hold money, right? So the computer you can say, hey, enforce the rules of chess. We both submit transactions, which are just moves. I move, you move, I move, you move. At the end, the computer says, okay, this is the result. Alice won this game, and let's pay out the funds to Alice. And the computer holds that. The problem today, back then, let's say before these platforms existed, is these, you can go ahead and do these things online, but you're basically going to, you're trusting some centralized provider to both enforce the rules correctly and hold your assets, right? So you can go to some chess site and you each put down some money and you play, but like they could also just say, hey, we're just pretending that, Alice won even though Bob won, right? There's nothing that's actually decentralized, trustlessly enforcing the rules. And by the way, they can also just say, thanks for the money. We're not really running this game. Like, goodbye, we're paying nobody.
Yeah.
And so what Ethereum is a computer that we can all agree on. It's transparent. We all see it's doing what it's doing. We know that it's running correctly. And whatever rules you encode are the rules that it's going to follow. So yeah, you could encode the wrong rules for chess, and that's what's going to be followed. But if you and I look at the contract and, okay, that's chess. That's the game of chess. And you'll know that Ethereum will follow those rules, and that's the trustless guarantee that it provides. And by the way, just to extend this analogy, the problem with Ethereum, the problem that Arbitrum addresses is it's a computer, but the capacity of this computer is about the same as my laptop. And if you want to do a computer that's going to facilitate the world's transactions, you need more than the power of my laptop, my single laptop for like the global computing. That's the problem that this has. And how do you then scale beyond that and get more capacity than just your laptop? That's the hard problem that Arbitrum solves.
We'll get there.
Yes.
What does Ethereum success look like to you?
Great question. I think Ethereum, there are many different aspects to this. I think Ethereum is actually a very good place in many ways. One definition of success, which I think we're hitting today, is broad diversity and experimentation. The fact that there are so many different teams building on Ethereum independently for so many different reasons, right? The Ethereum Foundation doesn't pay me to build on Ethereum. It doesn't pay us to build Arbitrum. It doesn't pay us to build Prism, the leading consensus client. It's an open ecosystem where others have figured out business models and reasons to build independently of someone centrally paying them. That is resilience, that is success, and that is innovation and experimentation, right? If you look back 5 years, Ethereum and what we believe the scaling technologies, everything we thought about Ethereum has changed and evolved in 5 years. If you look forward in 5 years, I think our understanding of smart contracts and blockchains and cryptocurrencies is going to change equally drastically again. I have no reason to think not, maybe even more, because so many smart people are entering the space at an accelerating rate. And the fact that that innovation and diversity is happening on Ethereum, I think is so important and is what tells me that Ethereum is future-proof and Ethereum is going to be the beacon of innovation and where the new technology emerges from. That being said, I think a second metric of success is definitely, broad branding, retail branding and understanding and appreciation of what Ethereum is. I think that's a place where maybe we can do some more work, because a lot of the core Ethereum people, and perhaps myself included, are a bit nerdy and really like to, do the deep dive tech research aspects of it and get into rooms and come out with these awesome protocol updates and diagrams and descriptions. But we also need to explain to the world in layman's terms of, hey, yeah, Ethereum is all that, but Ethereum is also just the blockchain, where you can build your decentralized application, the blockchain where you can build, DeFi, the blockchain where you can build, NFTs, where you see tokenization of real world assets, and really just speak more to that retail language and also focus on the needs of these people and not just, and say, okay, how do we hold your hand and onboard people to this chain? That's something which we're trying to do with Arbitrum. One of the things that Arbitrum does is actually make Ethereum more accessible from a fee perspective, from a speed perspective. We're working out from an onboarding and interoperability perspective. And there's a lot that we can offer there. But ultimately, I think we need to not just assume, hey, we're going to build great technology and everyone's going to come. We need to actually make that case very, very proactively. And hey, you should build on Ethereum. You should be building on Ethereum. It is the leading platform for decentralized applications, and make sure that it has, the branding to back that up.
Absolutely. That's also one of the reasons I'm not focused on one specific ecosystem, but there's a big problem in crypto in general. It's a very nerdy industry. People don't understand it. It's very intimidating. Yeah. How do you make all this more accessible to the normal people who don't even understand it? By talking to the founders, but in a normal way. Like understanding the person. Hey, look, behind each of these protocols or applications that seem and that are complicated, there is a human being with a soul. Exactly. And who is a normal person, right?
Relatively.
Relatively. I had Gavin Wood on this podcast.
Okay.
Another nerd. Another genius. The creator of the EVM and Solidity language. And actually, what does Ethereum success look like to you? Or what does Polkadot look like? I basically ask him, right?
Sure.
And I asked him, what's the best thing that came out of Ethereum? You mentioned CryptoKitties before, and that was his answer. He was like, CryptoKitties, maybe?
That seems like someone who hasn't paid much attention to Ethereum in a few years.
Then he said that Ethereum created the most millionaires out of any project out there. What's your reaction to this?
I don't know if that's true or not. It's definitely an interesting statement. But I do think actually that, to be honest, communities are built around a lot of things. And one of them is if there are a lot of people that are heavily invested in the community, and that could be financially, and that could be, hey, they held a lot of ETH early, they believed that it did well for them. That does help to build community. There's no question about that. And I don't think that's something we need to shy away from. It's just facts. It's just facts of life, how people work. So I do think that many successful communities most successful communities have a large set of people that are heavily invested in them and have done very well via that investment.
You mentioned before 2017, you go back to your previous PhD colleagues and advisor to build a business called Off-Chain Labs. What made you decide to take the leap and go all in crypto with a business?
So actually, the truth is we didn't go all in right away. So it was 2018, and we said, all right, let's build a business. It was like the August of 2018. That's when the paper was published. That's when I was graduating. We're like, let's actually commercialize this and build a business. But it actually started off as like a part-time thing that we were only doing, in our free extra time. So I actually went off to do a postdoc at Cornell Tech that year. Ed was still a professor at Princeton. Harry was still a student at Princeton. And actually, we could talk more about my work at Cornell Tech, but that was a fantastic opportunity for me as well, working with Ari Jules there, who's a professor at Cornell Tech, but also the research head of research at Chainlink, and that's how I got to know Sergey at the time, and a lot of it. If you look at the early, by the way, Arbitrum community, it was all the Chainlink community. So there's definitely a lot of interesting things to discuss there. But also actually at Cornell Tech, one paper that I'm very proud of there, I had the opportunity to work with Ari and Phil Diane, and we wrote the Flash Boys paper, right? So they have a company, Flashbots. We wrote the paper called Flash Boys 2.0, which was the paper that defined the word MEV, or a minor extractable value, that's become a very, very important topic today. So that's a long way of saying, actually. So initially it started off as something that was like, all right, we're going to kind of launch a company and, do this, but no one was ready to really commit. At some point, several months later, maybe 6 to 8 months later, we said, you know what, we should really do this. Let's actually raise funds for this company and go into this full time. And so we did that. I ended up, leaving my full-time role at Cornell Tech. Ed ended up actually leaving Princeton. He was eligible to get emeritus status at Princeton at that time, so that's what he did. And he left Princeton, and Harry also left and went full-time into Off-Chain Labs. So it was really we realized that, like, at some point, like, we either got to do it, and that's actually probably one of the biggest pieces of advice to give to someone. You can't do like 5 things at once. And at that time, we all had our day jobs, and we weren't really focusing on this really very much at all. So we said we have to go all in. We have to go all in. It means you have to raise funds. We raised funds. We left our other commitments, and we said, okay, we're going all in on this. There are some people, by the way, that can successfully do many, many things at once, but for most of us that aren't Elon Musk, it's very, very difficult, and you have to really, I think, focus on doing something and doing it right.
Absolutely. I had Yano from Blockworks.
Sure.
8 or 9 months ago, same seat as you. And he said that what made the whole difference for Blockworks is when they said, now we just ditch our investment banking job and we just go all in Blockworks. Otherwise, it would not have been possible to do something of that size.
Yeah, and it's very scary at the time to make that decision. We were fortunate to have enough academic pedigree that it wasn't hard to raise that first round of funding. So we weren't like, it wasn't obvious that success was going to be like what success meant, but we had not too much difficulty raising a seed round. But it's very, very scary. You look at the opportunity cost at the time. You have other opportunities in academia and tech, and to go all in on this loony idea that other people didn't believe at the time, right?
Yeah.
When we raised funds back then, people didn't believe in it, and necessarily many didn't.
2018 is the bear market, right? 2018, 2019. So
yes, and I remember
nothing was really happening on Ethereum yet.
Yes, and I remember so well. I'll tell you 2 things coming into these investor conversations. 2 reactions that were just like pervasive among our conversations. Number one is, I don't think scaling is a problem, right? Because like you said, there wasn't that much going on Ethereum at the time. I remember particularly one investor saying, if I had a list of all the problems with Ethereum, scaling wouldn't make the top 10. And that's what this investor said to me. Now, ironically, these things change so quickly. So you fast forward to 2 years later, and all these people come knocking your door and say, hey, have you guys built your thing yet? It's like, oh, the thing that you didn't want to fund because you thought was important. Like, these things take time. But that was like a reaction we got. A lot of people just didn't appreciate scaling as a problem. Clearly, that was not a correct take. And the second one, and this is actually a really interesting one, is often in time, people think they know like they don't know, everyone knows they don't know everything, the details, but people think they know the shape of everything. What I mean by this is, so Arbitrum is, a class of technology we call today a roll-up. Okay, that's the type of blockchain that it is, a layer 2 blockchain, we call it a roll-up. At the time, though, the idea of a layer 2 blockchain or a roll-up, this terminology didn't exist. There were two other dominant paths at the time that people believed would be used to scale Ethereum. One of them is called state channels. And this was like a generalization of the channels, payment channels that we see on Ethereum, like the Lightning Network. And the other one was called Plasma. And this was one, Vitalik had a paper on Plasma at the time. And I remember getting into these investor meetings and they would say, is it state channels or is it Plasma? And I would say, it's Arbitrum. It's this other thing. And I didn't have a term, like a general term. It's Arbitrum. It's neither. And the answer was like, no. Ethereum will scale via state channels and Plasma, and you need to fit into one of those buckets. And we resisted it, but actually we also gave in a little bit. So that year I went to the Cornell boot camp in Ithaca. This is actually the first time I met Vitalik, I believe, in person. He was there. And I remember giving a talk on Arbitrum, and I basically said, I'm going to reframe Arbitrum in the terminology that people know. And the name of the talk was Arbitrum, Advanced State Channels, right? So I took the state channel lingo and terminology and tried to fit Arbitrum into that. And I remember approaching Vitalik and saying, I'd like to tell you about Arbitrum, a really advanced state channel project. And I wasn't trying to, be disingenuous at the time. I was trying to, say, okay, I kind of buying into this a little bit. Like, it feels like everyone says it has to be state channels. Let me see how I can describe this using state channel terminology in a way that, talks that language. But I think actually, and actually, it was at this, I'll tell you one more story. It was at that same conference at Cornell that my friend Nicola Greco, he was at Filecoin, had research at Protocol Labs for a long time. He said to me and said, hey, there's all this talk about ZK rollups at the time. It was very early talk about rollups were becoming a term. I think you should call Arbitrum a rollup. And I remember saying, I don't think so, Nicola. I don't think so. And clearly he was onto something, very early. And a few months later, we actually did come around to that, not only us, but just as an industry. But the general lesson here that I learned, which I think is the most important, is everyone always thinks that they know the shape of what the future will look like. And we really, really don't. And as, if you have an idea and you're going against that, don't be too discouraged. In fact, the best ideas will be the ones that challenge the status quo and come from outside the box and really, expand the box. That's what we were able to do. And even today, when I've had these conversations with so many times, people say, okay, fine, but the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM, we know exactly what it will be today. There's no need for any more experimentation, right? I mentioned before, Ethereum has so much experimentation. I think that's fantastic because I think the same way 5 years ago we were talking about Plasma and state channels, and 5 years from today are going to evolve what we're talking about. But there are those that somehow think that, history was history, but we're ready, we're at maturity today. We don't need to think about this today. We're ready to just go all in. But I think, no, we actually need that experimentation. We need that innovation because don't fool yourselves, right? The world is constantly changing. Technology is always evolving, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo of what the best ideas are. Those who think they know everything today probably have the best idea given what they know, but some smart person is going to come with some other idea that can easily shake up an entire industry.
I think Mark Twain says something like, it's not what you don't know that kills you, it's what you know for sure that ain't so.
Exactly. Yes. Very, very well said. See, I had to go 5 minutes to say what Mark said succinctly.
15 minutes, not 5.
There you go. Thank you.
You mentioned rollups, right? We're not going to go that much into for me, and I've been in crypto for 7-8 years, just thinking about hearing rollups, all that stuff. I'm like, and probably if I think like that, probably 99.9% of the people on this planet think like that, right? But you mentioned this thing called layer 2.
Yeah.
What is a layer 2 if you had to explain it to your mom?
A layer 2 is a blockchain that sits on top of another blockchain. And what that means is, and actually, it's as the name layer suggests, it's really a very common way to build protocols. If you look at the internet, the OSI diagram, there are 7 layers, of the network stack. And the idea is that you sort of separate different functionality from each other and you build them in layers. So we have layer 1, which is the consensus of Ethereum. And now we have layer 2s, which are, like Arbitrum, which are blockchains that are utilize that consensus, but can also now, do other things, specialize in certain ways. And I'll give you an example of why this is really important. I mentioned we built Prism. Prism was very instrumental the Prism team was very instrumental in doing the merge. So Ethereum's move from proof of work to proof of stake. The same day that Ethereum moved from proof of work to proof of stake, Arbitrum also did. But you know what? Arbitrum didn't have to do anything because Arbitrum is at layer 2 and it inherits its consensus from layer 1. It latches onto Ethereum and uses its security. It uses its consensus, but it does that via the smart contract layer, via the API that Ethereum provides. And today we have over 100 Arbitrum chains in development, dozens of which are already on mainnet. We also have competitors with their own layer 2s, and all these many, many different chains with different execution environments and differences. They're not all doing the same thing, are utilizing Ethereum's consensus. So there's one consensus that's powering today 100 plus chains. So a layer 2 is a blockchain inside another blockchain, and we're able to utilize the layer 1 blockchain. We don't have to have our own validators. We don't have to have our own layer 1 staked validators. We don't have to have our own consensus protocol. We're able to utilize Ethereum security, and we're able to bootstrap so many different chains doing so many different things via Ethereum. Imagine otherwise, every time you wanted to build a new chain, you'd have to go ahead and find new validators like layer 1s do. It's a very, very big process. You can spin up a layer 2 on Ethereum today that's secured by Ethereum, that has its consensus, that's doing something wacky and wild and totally different than anyone else has ever done before. And you can just focus on your layer and not have to worry about building an entire consensus, right? Not reinventing the wheel to do that.
We define what a layer 2 is. I'm not sure my mom would understand that, but...
You said my mom. No, okay.
Fair enough. Actually, I heard a bunch of people on this podcast saying, actually, my parents are very technical, so...
Exactly.
Why do we need a layer 2 on Ethereum?
Great question. So I'll give you two answers. Answer number one is you've probably heard of what's called the blockchain trilemma, which is the idea that blockchains can provide two of three things at layer 1, at the core layer: security, decentralization, and scalability. And Ethereum goes very, very, very heavy on the security and the decentralization. And what gets traded off is the scalability. And this is inherent. So here's why. What does it mean to be decentralized? It means that anyone with basic hardware or basic cloud instances can go ahead and run an Ethereum node and participate in the network and validate the network and secure the network. And that means is, this goes back to our point before, you have to basically make it easy for anyone to do. So the computer needs to stay at the speed of my laptop roughly, because you want to make sure that, everyone can keep up. Even people with just, a regular internet connection at home, with a regular cloud instance can keep up and validate Ethereum. You could turn that up and say, let's actually make it much, much harder to scale Ethereum. Let's increase the capacity of the laptop 100x. But that means that all these validators at the bottom, they fall off. Right? They can no longer keep up with the network. They need to have, at the extreme, maybe you need a data center to actually validate the protocol. It might still be open and permissionless because in theory, anyone who has a data center can go ahead and participate. But in practice, who has a data center? And you get to de facto centralization. So not technically centralized because it's open, but there are only a few people that can actually participate in the protocol. So you see this trade-off between scalability, which is the ability to crank up the capacity, and decentralization. The higher you make the capacity, the bandwidth, the throughput, the less people that can actually participate, and the decentralization goes away. So what Ethereum believes is we don't want to compromise on security and decentralization. We also don't want to sit in our ivory tower and say, okay, you still have to use Ethereum, pay these high fees because the capacity is low and demand is high, and you should use it. We have to say, how do we actually make it usable for protocols and people building? And the answer is this layer 2 structure. So we have this rock solid, ironclad, secure, decentralized layer 1. That's called Ethereum. And then we have layer 2 protocols that can tap into that security, but can actually scale more on the second layer. They can scale more than Ethereum could. So that's the answer number one. And briefly, answer number two to your question is the innovation angle. So there are so many different chains on Ethereum today doing different things, right? We are on Arbitrum chains, we support something called Arbitrum Stylus, which gives you the ability to write smart contracts in traditional programming languages like Rust and C and C++. You have a team called Phoenix that's building a fully homomorphic encryption, a privacy environment, a chain that uses deep cryptography to get privacy. You have ApeChain, which is building an Arbitrum chain for Bored Ape Yacht Club that's building, for their community and customizing their chain for their community. You have Azuki building Anime.com, an Arbitrum chain that's customized for their community. I can go on and on and on. You have Kinto, which is building an Arbitrum chain for institutionalized investors. Imagine, right, if we were all on one layer. All of these chains would have to, all of these protocols would have to use the exact same infrastructure, the exact same execution environment. They couldn't actually customize it at all. But what we've done is actually by separating in both layers, say everyone can utilize Ethereum's consensus, and now you can build your own customized, opinionated, differentiated environment on top of that. So you can go deep on, your homomorphic encryption. You can go deep on your KYC environment for investors. You can build protocol, features for your community, and we can all utilize the same consensus. It actually makes innovation so much easier. Whereas in other ecosystems, you'd have to bootstrap validators, consensus, staking, layer one tokens, tokenomics for every one of these chains. But Ethereum, you can have hundreds of chains that are doing this using one consensus.
Let's take an example, Solana. What's the problem with Solana?
Solana takes the
difference, let's say.
Yeah, Solana believes, I think, something very. If you ask Anatoly, and he says it very publicly, he says there are 6 interesting smart contract, designs, the smart contracts generally that are interesting. Right. And he believes that this innovation on the execution layer is not as important. And we basically have a good execution layer, in his case for the SVM. And there are only these few smart contracts that actually matter. And therefore thinks that this uniformity is actually great. And everyone's doing the same thing. It's uniform. And by the way, the argument to that is it feels less fragmented, right? Everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone's building on the same thing, and it works well, and it does that. But I think there are two arguments against that. Number one is the experimentation and innovation aspect, right? I don't think that we know which 6 smart contracts are important today. Even if you believe that only 6 smart contracts will matter, zoom out. We are so early on that the thought that in 5 or 10 years that won't change drastically, our understanding won't change drastically, to me is just wrong. And if you look back 5 years, it has. So why wouldn't it in the next 5 years? That's number one. So
this is your example that you mentioned before, right? Which is, hey, we don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And there's so much experimentation, innovation happening in Ethereum, and I don't think we're ready to limit that. In Solana's case, it's much more limited. There isn't much you can do to innovate on the execution layer. You can't build a chain that's secured by Solana that also has, fully homomorphic encryption. You can't build a chain that's secured by Solana that has, deep KYC permissioning involved in it.
What's an example of concrete application that someone normal could understand that couldn't be built on the top of Solana today?
A fully private chain. A chain where at the door, and you can have, or an environment, if you will, but you have, people launching applications that have full privacy built in. So you don't see people's balances, you don't see people's activity. It just, you can build certain applications that have privacy built in at the application layer, but to have an environment that's just completely segregated and private. Similarly for, institutional environment. You have chains on Ethereum and Arbitrum that are gated for institutional customers. Everyone on chain is KYC'd, right? So you know who they are and you can interact with them and transact with them. You can't do those things on a single chain. But actually the other half, and this goes back to my 2 previous arguments. So one is on this innovation. The other one is just on the design and the scalability. We can't do everything, in one layer, because look at every other protocol. Look at the internet, right? Multi-layer protocols allow us to innovate on multiple layers and allow us to scale, well past the capacity of one layer. And we see this in practice when, a big launch on a monolithic chain often bring down the infrastructure or slow it down or make it unusable. We can't afford to do that, for the world's transaction volume. So I think just in terms of pure scalability, and by the way, this is the type of thing where it's easier to bootstrap where you have one environment that's monolithic. You sort of, at some point take a dive and you have to sort of fragment yourself, if you will, if you want to go like Ethereum is doing and have multiple chains. But long term, it's going to pay off largely, right? Long term, as your capacity grows, it's going to be the only way that can actually, scale, right? Imagine, like, again, if you wanted, imagine we had 100 chains and we didn't have Ethereum as layer one. All these layer twos were independent. We literally would have had to move to go from proof of work to proof of stake. We would have had to move every single one of these chains individually. It would have been an absolute nightmare. So there's a lot of scalability and just, operational efficiencies that come from this design. And there is some short-term pain because, yeah, it's much easier when there's, one development team and one development cycle and everyone's on the same page. But ultimately, if we're going to the point of world scale that I think we're going, it's just not going to be feasible to onboard everyone. And I have a lot of respect for their team. I think that they're doing things that are very interesting. But ultimately, I think at scale, we need a roll-up-centric multi-layer design.
I'm actually talking to him next Monday on the podcast.
He'll probably disagree with everything I said, but...
Another one who disagrees. I talked to Evan from Sui, from Miston Labs.
Sure.
Co-founder, CEO of Miston Labs, the company behind Sui Network. And he said something like, Ethereum doesn't work. And the proof is that these layer twos are all centralized.
False.
What does that mean? And what's your answer?
I don't know what it means because you have to ask him, but I can tell you it's not true. If you look at Arbitrum today, Arbitrum has decentralized, permissionless validation. It's secured by Ethereum, has proofs that are... And by the way, so maybe what it means is if you look broadly at layer twos, there are some layer twos that he's 100% right about, that are centralized, that are not secure. That's not the case with Arbitrum. And I think, Evan's actually a good friend. I think he'd actually probably agree more than disagree on the Arbitrum point. I can't speak for him. But in the case of Arbitrum, that's just not the case, right? Arbitrum is decentralized, it has fully decentralized validation. Anyone can participate, can validate the protocol. It's the way we call the one honest validator assumption. That all you need is one honest validator in order to make the protocol, plus Ethereum, right? So one honest validator can appeal to Ethereum and make sure that the protocol operates correctly, which is a very strong security perspective. He's not incorrect, though, that there are other chains that utilize Ethereum L2 branding that don't have that security today. And I actually think it's a problem. And I think Vitalik also does. Vitalik had this thing. He said, come 2025. So there's this 3-stage of decentralization that Vitalik has. There's stage 0, 1, 2, we're computer scientists, so we start at 0. So I tell you, the Arbitrum was the first chain that was at stage 1, and that doesn't sound very impressive, but actually it's pretty impressive. The idea is that, I think Vitalik said he's only talking about this year about stage 1 rollups. He's not mentioning any of the stage 0 ones anymore, because there is this problem where, people are giving an IOU to security and saying, oh yeah, we're using Ethereum, but if you look under the hood, they're not actually. That's not the case for Arbitrum. Arbitrum has decentralized, permissionless validation secured by Ethereum today. And I like to say it's like the gun to the head test, right? If you tried to coerce me in some way and said, hey, Steven, shut down Arbitrum, or hey, Steven, move funds from my account to your account on Arbitrum, I would say I just don't have the ability to do that because I really, really don't. There are some layer twos. And by the way, if you simultaneously tried to coerce everyone at Off-Chain Labs and the Arbitrum Foundation, we just don't have the ability to do that. When we decentralized the protocol, we really gave it up. And the Arbitrum DAO has full execution power over the future of the technology and can't do that. To Evan's point,
I had Jesse Pollack on the podcast, and I think he might have been referring more to Base and the relationship with Coinbase, and probably a lot of other layer twos.
So Base today, from my understanding, has it's the Coinbase and Optimism have a 2 of 2 control where they can make changes to the protocol. Right? In Arbitrum's case, you have the DAO and a decentralized security council of 12 people that's elected by the DAO. I'm not on it, never have been. And 9 out of 12 people to do it. So it's a very, very, very different thing. But I believe, and again, if I'm wrong, correct me. But as far as I know, there's a 2 out of 2 multi-sig that can change things there today. I don't think that they're malicious. I don't think that they will. But a decentralized guarantee, you don't want someone saying, hey, I'm a nice person. You want someone saying, hey, push comes to shove, the chain is actually decentralized, it's trustless, and no matter what happens, I don't have the ability or power to actually change that. That's what we want. And, Arbitrum is, universally regarded as the most secure and decentralized layer 2 that exists today. And we take these things very, very seriously.
What would you tell a person like me, again, normal person, who, again, I've been in crypto for quite a lot of time, but I'm pretty lazy. I don't want, when I'm using Arbitrum, to have ETH Arbitrum or Arbitrum ETH or USDC Arbitrum. And then when I move on to another layer 2, Base, have Base ETH. I don't want to do that. And I think, again, if I don't want to do that and I've been in crypto for 7 years, I think 99.9% of people on this planet don't want to do that.
So here's what I'll tell you. First of all, I'll say I don't only view this as an Ethereum problem. I think it's actually an ecosystem problem, right? The fact that you have USD Solana and USDC Ethereum, USDC, like the fact that Arbitrum is an L2 and not an L1, it's still a problem. If Arbitrum was an L1, we still have this fragmentation. So unless a person is willing to say, oh, you know what? And the solution is I'm only going to use Solana, I'll tell you, okay, here's another solution. Only use Arbitrum. Meaning, like, I think there's a problem of fragmentation in the Ethereum, in the ecosystem today. And it's not really a layer 2 problem. It's just a multi-chain problem, honestly. And our goal, and we're building this, we didn't talk much about this yet, but at Off-Chain Labs, so we mentioned Arbitrum, we mentioned Prism, and now we're very, very focused on solving Ethereum and even broader, blockchain interoperability. Because I think you're right. You don't want to do that. I don't want to do that either. It's a mess. It's confusing. It's hard to track my assets. The good thing is, we're putting out technology. We've already announced, I don't want to get into the details because it's a bit technical, but technology that will allow you to go back and forth between any chain in less than 3 seconds, any chain that participates. And we're hoping to get broad adoption across not just Arbitrum chains, across EVM chains generally, because again, my goal isn't to unify Arbitrum, it's to unify Ethereum. That's how we win. And actually, even more broadly, if we can take our technology and help users get back and forth from Arbitrum to Solana, I'd love to do that too. I think long-term, that's where we should be headed because that's where the real fragmentation problem happens. And we're building very, very strongly and very committed to building technology for that. The interesting thing I'll tell you, which is maybe goes against the way people think about it, I think this is 90% a UX problem and 10% a deep research problem. And what I mean by that is the problem that you described just now is somewhat a reflection of the technology, but more a reflection of your front end and your wallets that are showing you this experience and not just abstracting it for you.
Absolutely.
And I think we as a community, and we're working with other partners on this, can solve this. And my bold statement today here is we will solve Ethereum interoperability and hopefully beyond. Because like I said, I want to solve interoperability for every chain, even Solana, etc. We will solve this in 2025, certainly for the Ethereum ecosystem.
UX. I think I mentioned before, I had Brandon from Phantom Wallet on this podcast. The first experience for on-chain users is always a wallet. It's the entry point. So I sat down with Brandon, the co-founder of Phantom Wallet, recently, and he said that he and his team, they were actually deep in the Ethereum ecosystem before starting, I think they were working for 0x.
Okay.
The three co-founders. And they were believers in Ethereum, but they noticed more than 5 years ago already early cracks in the Ether ecosystem, which is why they launched Phantom on Solana. One of these early cracks is the main Ethereum wallet, Metamask, which you just mentioned now, right? The wallet. It's a wallet for developers where users sometimes need to copy and paste an RPC code to use a new chain. It's his argument, and also, I mean, I've done it, right? And I'm not very technical, and you can do it, right? But you don't want to do it. And the reason why you have to do it is because it's a developer wallet. It's not an end user wallet. But it's the main wallet on Ethereum. Then he said also, Brandon, the other early crack that they saw was a potential sea of layer 2s. How do we fix the Ethereum user experience to make the ecosystem as exciting as it used to be and onboard the new generation of on-chain users that are mostly going for Phantom and Solana today?
Yeah, I agree that probably the reason, UX, that's the point. That the reason is, I think Phantom has a fantastic UX and people know they can download Phantom, go to Jupiter. They basically know what to do and how to do it on Solana. With Ethereum, I think there's a lot more confusion, unfortunately, today. I think a lot of it is just, like I said, narrative and even brand, on the UX. For example, you can if I can erase the last hour and a half of our conversation and just forget about the fact that Arbitrum is a layer 2 You can pretend there's a layer 1 and go on Coinbase and withdraw funds there, go on Binance, withdraw in every other exchange, and just use Arbitrum as a layer 1. But there's a mental load on users. There's no question about it. It says layer 2, this is confusing. Which layer 2?
I don't know what you use. Yeah,
exactly. But a lot of it is a mental load, and I do think, back to the wallet point, that a lot of it is going to be solved at the UX layer, right? So we have really good protocols. I mentioned before, we're building some really fast interop protocols that will support it, but unless those are, and there are already great, protocols that exist today. There's a whole, ecosystem of fast interop bridging protocols, but it's really on the user experience. We need to package that up for users in a way that they just see an aggregated balance, right? They just see, they want to go from chain A to chain B in the Ethereum ecosystem. Their wallet just helps them, abstracts them, and does that for them. And I think it's going to require, different wallets and infrastructure providers and other teams to work together to build this experience. I know we're playing a big part in building the infrastructure here, and this is, like I said, I believe will happen in 2025. But there's no question about it. The wallet is a very, very big part, and I think there are two parts here. It's an opportunity for we see new wallets coming to market all the time that are trying to solve this, and also incumbent wallets that need to understand that, hey, this is an important thing that needs to be solved. And the good thing is, I think the Ethereum ecosystem is very much waking up to this today and feeling a lot of the pressure to solve this problem, which maybe you say is a bad thing and scary thing, but I think it's a good thing. The fact that we're aware of this problem, understand that users need a better UX is good, because the good news is we know how to do this. We have the core technology to do this. Again, I think it's a 90% UX problem, 10% deep research problem. We're doing a lot of deep research at Off-Chain Labs too, and as an ecosystem. And over time, we'll slot in better and better technology into the UX to make this cheaper and more efficient and faster. But we got to just get out the 90%, I think, sooner than later, hopefully in existing wallets, but in any wallet that will do this.
You say we have the right technology, but do you have the right people? For example, Brandon and his team, they were previous Twitter guys and Facebook guys who built the Silicon Valley startups that scaled massively and were user-facing applications. Do you think that's one of the issues of Ethereum, that it's attracting much more, as you said before, nerds that are very much more into theory and research?
I think we definitely need people that are UX oriented and product oriented. I think we have a good number of those in the Ethereum ecosystem today. But to your point, could we use more? Absolutely. And I think the community understands this today. And to the extent that, via hiring in companies like Off-Chain Labs, or via, incentivizing and encouraging and inviting new players to come into the ecosystem, absolutely. Understanding that focus, it's the user is really important. The difference of Ethereum is we understand it's the user and growth, but that's always going to be secondary to security and decentralization. We're never going to compromise for that. I think that's a good thing, but I don't think you have to compromise. I think we have our security, we have our decentralization, we know how to do that, and now we need to really, really focus on the user and the user experience. And to the extent that we need to bring in new people and new voices and new perspectives to help us do that, I think I would welcome that very much.
We need to talk about Arbitrum a bit. We're getting there now. Your company Off-Chain Labs launched a layer 2 called Arbitrum. What's the difference between Arbitrum and all the other layer 2s built on Ethereum?
So we touched on some of this before. The security and decentralization is fundamentally different on Arbitrum. And this is not just me saying it. There's a site called L2Beat, L2Beat.com, that tracks all these. And they have these diagrams, and they show that Arbitrum is the most decentralized general purpose layer 2 across the categories that they track. So this is objectively speaking, but it's also well understood in the industry, and it comes from our focus. When it comes to the other, really a few interesting things, the ecosystem, Arbitrum does, primarily really well in DeFi, real-world assets, tokenization, stablecoins, and also gaming. Those are the core areas of focus of the Arbitrum ecosystem, where Arbitrum really, really shines. And the other thing is back to the decentralization. So let me go a little bit deeper in there and talk about the setup of the entities at Arbitrum. So I mentioned I'm at Off-Chain Labs. There's also something called the Arbitrum Foundation, and there's something called the Arbitrum DAO. And the Arbitrum is an experiment in decentralization in a way that really doesn't exist anywhere else. Certainly in no other layer 2, but really, unprecedented in many ways. I'll give you a few examples to illustrate what I mean. So the Arbitrum network has fees. Those fees don't go to me, don't go to Off-Chain Labs, don't go to the Arbitrum Foundation. They actually go into the on-chain treasury controlled by the Arbitrum DAO and token holders. So there's 20,000 plus ETH, for example, that go into that are currently sitting in the Arbitrum DAO. And you can track this all on chain. I don't know the exact balance today, but the idea is that all this is on chain. There's 3.5 billion ARB or so that are in the Arbitrum on-chain treasury, not controlled by the Arbitrum Foundation's wallet, but actually controlled by the token holders on-chain. And this is actually like completely different from most other protocols. In many other protocols, there's the governance and the voters, and then there's the people with the keys. And the people with the keys are supposed to listen to the people that are voting. But in Arbitrum's case, that's not true from a financial perspective where the assets sit, but also from a technology perspective, from an update perspective. I mentioned before that even if you try to coerce me, you can't get me to push any update on the Arbitrum chain. I don't have the keys. So how do we update the Arbitrum chains? The answer is we at Off-Chain Labs or anyone else goes ahead and packages up an update. It says, hey, we think this is a good idea, submits it on chain to the Arbitrum token holders vote on this, and it's self-executing, which means the vote itself is what actually makes the upgrade possible to happen, to activate. Exactly. And so you don't need this like trust that someone's going to do the right thing or this glue. It's the vote itself. That's true from a spending perspective, and that's true from just a core technical update perspective as well. And this is, I think really powerful. And the last part of this also is, if you think about Arbitrum, one view that I like to have of Arbitrum is like an on-chain sovereign wealth fund, right? So Arbitrum has this core resource, which is execution, right? So it has its own chain, the main Arbitrum DAO chains like Arbitrum 1, which collect fees. It also has 100 plus other chains and, which use the Arbitrum technology, and all of them that aren't sitting on top of Arbitrum 1 actually pay 10% of their profits to the Arbitrum DAO as well. So it's this business that's really selling execution environment and collecting, fees from diversified resources. Some of these are L2s and Ethereum. We even have L3s on Base that are actually paying the Arbitrum DAO, for their execution environment because it's the most performant and customizable execution environment today. And the DAO now has the ability to invest and reinvest in the ecosystem in sustainable ways. The Arbitrum DAO has launched a fund called the GCP, which is a gaming fund. It's a 200 million token fund. Other ecosystems also have gaming funds. I think people, and this is going to be a good illustration of the difference, people misunderstand this. They say, okay, Arbitrum has a gaming fund and, Avalanche or whatever other ecosystem has a gaming fund too. What's the point of the gaming fund? And the answer that probably an average person will give you is, it's to spur innovation in gaming in the ecosystem, and now there's going to be gaming activity. Fantastic. And that's true. But there's also something else. You say, who is the beneficiary of this gaming fund, right? So if the gaming fund makes a bet, an investment, and gets 100x return, who gets that? In most other cases, it's the investors or the labs company that's building this, right? So they're spurring the ecosystem, but they're taking the gains. The Arbitrum Gaming Catalyst Program, the GCP, which is the gaming fund, has one LP, and that LP is the Arbitrum DAO, is the Arbitrum token holder. So it's building a business of sustainability in a way that really no other project has done or tried to do. And I think that's a massive differentiator and one that will make it a successful and sustainable project, because they're not just throwing up money to grants in ways that, okay, let's hope that we build some, ecosystem and network effect here. We're actually investing in the ecosystem, reinvesting assets, diversifying assets, getting yield from all sorts of the Arbitrum DAO invests in on-chain RWA projects as in money market funds on-chain, in protocols like Lido and Fluid, etc., and really getting diversified assets, for their, diversifying their portfolio in a way that's completely different than any other protocol that I'm aware of in crypto today.
There's a lot of layer 2s. How did you establish Arbitrum as a leader, or as the leader in a sea of layer 2s?
So the one answer is it was the first general purpose layer 2 to launch, and there's always some benefit, right? I remember the energy the day that we launched. So we launched to developers in March of 2021 and to users in August of 2021. And like the entire ecosystem was sitting on edge waiting for this, right? Today, another layer 2 launches every day. No one really bats an eyelash, no one cares, but we were solving a real problem. And a lot of it is there at the right time and not making compromises. So we were fortunate to have been there early and to have been able to actually build out our technology stack and not compromise. So a lot of that was, the right place, the right time, or having the foresight, actually seeing these problems early on when others didn't, right? In a world where others were saying, build, Plasma or state channels. Yeah, we were saying, no, we're building this. And sometimes that early vision pays off. I also think the second part of it is the ecosystem ethos around fair launch. So I mentioned before that we launched Arbitrum to developers in March of 21 and to users in August of 21. And I remember July that year rolled around and some protocol said, all right, we've developed already. We're ready to go, like open up. And we said, no, we're not going to open up. We're not ready yet to open up. We want everyone to be there, have an equal opportunity and be there on the same page and at the same time. And in August of 21, on the same day that Arbitrum went live, I believe roughly the same day Uniswap went live, SushiSwap went live, and a little exchange called Swapper by DXDAO went live as well. And we never gave preferential treatment really to anyone on this. We tried to support everyone. We gave great treatment to everyone, but everyone knew that they can have a fair shot in Arbitrum. And the reason why Uniswap was going to win on L2, Uniswap just passed $300 billion in volume in Arbitrum, the most of any layer 2, is not because we rolled out the red carpet and say, hey, Uniswap, we're gonna, put the thumb on the scale and make you win. It's because they're really good at what they do and they have a good shot of executing a layer 2, but we gave the same opportunity to everyone else. And if you fast forward to today, if you ask us about Arbitrum versus other layer 2s, our ability, I think, to get out of our own way and not try to compete everywhere has been very helpful. If you look at stablecoin adoption on Arbitrum, Arbitrum is the only layer 2, I think the only chain other than Ethereum, I think, that has more, billions of dollars in both USDT and USDC. USDT, just announced a few weeks ago an expansion called USDT 0, where they're expanding to many other chains via USDT 0, and they chose Arbitrum as the hub for that expansion. So all these other chains are actually doing transactions that are affecting transactions in Arbitrum. And the idea is that all these different protocols can compete and feel comfortable in Arbitrum, whereas there are USDC chains, like, there are USDT chains, but for Arbitrum, it's really, we don't try to compete against everyone. We try to create a fair and open ecosystem where others can compete. We're very content, building at the infrastructure layer and trying to create an open, competitive environment, but where everyone is sure they can get a fair shake and don't have to, feel like they're competing against the house or otherwise disadvantaged, which I actually think is unfortunately a big differentiator against some other chains today.
I had Jeff, the founder of Hyperliquid, on this podcast a few months ago. How did you manage to get guys like Jeff or Vlad from Robinhood to build on Arbitrum?
So, Robinhood is a partner where you can trade any asset on Arbitrum dexes today. Any assets listed on Arbitrum on the Robinhood crypto app today, and we like their team a lot. And I think the answer is they appreciate the technology, they appreciate the roadmap, and we also give really good support and developer support to teams. But really, it's about the ecosystem, where the ecosystem is, where the opportunities are, and they see this as well. Hyperliquid is a good one because there's those that don't like those that try to fade Arbitrum, say, oh, Arbitrum is the Hyperliquid bridge, right? That's I don't know if you've heard this narrative around there, and I actually say that's completely backwards. It's like Hyperliquid built their product adjacent to Arbitrum, sourcing all the liquidity from Arbitrum because they understand that Arbitrum has a great product that allows people to easily bridge onto, that has a ton of liquidity on chain, that's going to be a really good propellant for the success of their product. And we see this, really time and time again. And the answer is it's not like, backroom deals or things that we've done. Like I don't think I ever spoke to Jeff before they launched on Arbitrum. It was more about, if the product speaks for itself, our teams are, obviously very in close contact today. But my point is, it wasn't some sort of, private deal. It's the product doing what it does, product market fit. And it's the best place to build your product in crypto if you want to access deep liquidity. That's organic liquidity.
You could have sold yourself as the amazing business developer of Web3. I didn't appreciate it. Who else is doing a great job in the layer 2 space and why?
Great question. I think that there are so many others. I'll mention a few. I like the Starkware team a lot. They've, at this point, I think they're doing things on Bitcoin and Ethereum, but just they're very, very technology focused. And in fact, if you look at all the ZK rollups, a lot of the core technology that everyone else is using, they've actually been the ones that have initially innovated that, and I think they're doing incredible things. Similarly, the Polygon team has actually really, really strong ZK researchers there as well, who I have a ton of respect for. And I think if you ask me actually who was one of the best or maybe the best business development people in crypto, to back to that question, I'd say it might be Sandeep, right? Fantastic.
That's at least the reputation they had last cycle. right? With all the deals they were doing with the Instagram, and like people were saying these guys have the best BD team.
Sandeep is a powerhouse. I think, yeah. So they've pivoted today to be more of the Aguilera strategy, and that's like a very different strategy. But Sandeep is a very, very, he's a good friend, but also just a really, really effective, leader, and one that's able to sell the benefits of not only the product of crypto. If you ask me, for example, right, whether they're on Polygon today or not, the amount of roads that those guys paved in 2021, and that's a very, very hard thing to do. To get all of these different institutions interested is a very, very hard task to do. And even if some of those aren't on Polygon today, they did, I think, the entire ecosystem a favor by doing that. So a lot of respect for those two teams for sure.
What does Arbitrum success look like to you?
Arbitrum's success, Arbitrum is quickly emerging as the default execution environment. I mentioned that's for Arbitrum 1 on the L2 space. That's for L3s that are launching on top of Arbitrum 1. That's even for chains in other environments. We have a chain called Corn that's, really focused on Bitcoin. Their fees are dominated in Bitcoin, have, billions of dollars in TVL on that chain as well. So Arbitrum, I think it's a dual success strategy. I think the core Arbitrum 1 chain has to be successful. And then it's around this, just build a product that builders can customize. How can we support the most builders in the most unique, different environments and get out of our own way, right? The fact that we're comfortable with, Arbitrum, powering the biggest L3s on base, some might say, hey, why would we allow that? Like, don't allow the license to do that. It's like, no, understand that some people want to build there, and how can we service them? How can we, provide the Arbitrum product there? And they're contributing back to the Arbitrum DAO as well as part of that. So I think it's building a general purpose product that people can use, and then building the most customizable stack that anyone can use to build whatever they want in crypto. That is success to me. And also it's about long-term success, right? So I view, I don't view this as like, oh, I need to capture every minute of every cycle. I want Arbitrum to be long-term success and long-term the one that's building in the applications that I think are going to transform the world. And you won't win every short-term narrative. Arbitrum definitely didn't win the meme coin narrative. 3 weeks ago, we might have thought that was a problem. Today, that seems okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay to take long-term bets and say, we're not going to win every single short-term narrative, but we're building towards where we believe value is long-term. We have a strong focus on DeFi, RWAs, tokenization, stablecoin, and gaming. And it's okay for the ecosystem to have that extremely strong focus and to, be able to weather, the short-term hype cycles and not catch every single one of them.
What's something that you believe in that most people would not agree with?
So many in our ecosystem today say that there's going to be a gazillion chains and every product should have their own chain. I think that's actually a big mistake. And I think that there are products that should have their own chain, but probably most teams today don't belong having their own chain. There's a proliferation of block space today. Not every team needs to have their own branded chain. If you have a product, if you have a retail product, an institutional product that has users, sure, you might be a good candidate for that. And that's actually one of the benefits that we have, going back to the previous question, is we have, when I go to talk to people about building an Arbitrum, I say, I don't have to try to sell you a chain. I don't have to tell you chains are terrible. I tell you, maybe a chain's good for you, maybe it's not, because the Arbitrum ecosystem has both of these products. But I think there's definitely this on both sides. I would say in the circles that I'm in, there's, prevalent is most people say, oh, everyone should have their own blockchain. They're going to have a million blockchains in a year. And then you have those that are, completely on the other side of this. But I think, I believe it's a bit both. There will be probably dozens of successful chains, but I don't think there will be thousands or millions of successful forward-facing chains.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was awesome. I was a bit, not worried is not the right word, but thinking beforehand, this might be a bit too technical, etc. But I think we did a pretty good job at simplifying everything. And I actually found this was a brilliant conversation. So thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure to be here, and I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you.